Hey everyone, I am here with Alex Press, staff writer at Jacobin and author of The Alabama Town That Could Defeat Jeff Bezos. Her piece is in the New Republic. How are you doing today, Alex?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And honestly, I was just listening to Democracy Now's segment this morning on this very topic, and a lot of what you highlighted so succinctly in your piece was discussed there. But I would love if you could flesh it out for me because this is a really important fight in terms of a David versus Goliath situation. That's how you refer to it as, and how many people have talked about this fight. Amazon, the second largest employer in the United States, is facing a unionization fight in Alabama, a small town called Bessemer, where employees are banding together and trying to form a union despite intense opposition. Can you talk about and just give us a broad overview, and then we can get into the finer details?
Sure. So I think an important part of the overview is that this facility only opened about a year ago in Bessemer, Alabama. So Amazon, as your viewers might know, has grown incredibly during the pandemic. So many of its competitors, small sort of retailers, have been shut down because of the pandemic, and that money has instead gone to Amazon. So Amazon has been opening up new facilities constantly.
And
The
I just interject really quickly because I think the stat that you put in was so interesting. How Amazon added triple the amount of jobs in 2020's fourth quarter than they did in 2019, just to show how much of that dynamic is playing out that Alex is laying out.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to overstate how much this company has grown. It's sort of like Amazon is eating the world. One financial analyst put it as the pandemic was like a growth hormone for Amazon. So Amazon, even before this year, was already, one of the most powerful and biggest companies in the country and around the world, but now more so than ever. So these workers in Bessemer filed for a union election in November of 2020. Which means that about 8 months after their facility opened, they had already gone to the National Labor Relations Board and said, we want to vote on unionizing. They're organizing with the union that's the RWDSU. That union has pretty good representation in the area among people who work in food processing. So like poultry processing plants in the Bessemer and Birmingham area. And so one distinctive thing about this campaign is that those workers themselves are sort of leading the organizing. Often in organizing campaigns, the union kind of brings in its staff from wherever they might be from to sort of help, have cards outside of the facility, get workers to sign up. And there's nothing wrong with that, but often, it makes it a little easier for the employer to say that the union is an outside force, right? Which is one of the go-to anti-union strategies. Here, these are their neighbors. These are other people from the Bessemer area who are leading this organizing. And a big part of the piece I wrote and of the dynamics of this campaign are that it's explicitly anti-racist. So these are overwhelmingly Black workers at this facility. Bessemer itself is about 70% Black. And I think I highlighted in that New Republic piece is actually that this has a really long history in Bessemer. So even though people sort of hear Alabama and they think, this must be a really anti-union place, it's a right to work state, it has low unionization rates. The Bessemer area and the Birmingham area, which is right near it, they themselves actually were once sort of centers of unionization. Alabama at one point had a higher unionization rate than any state today does. It had about 25% of workers organized into unions. And in Bessemer and Birmingham, there were coal miners that were really active in both union campaigns and also politically progressive people. And so those roots, this old Black industrial class roots, these are people's grandparents, right? These are actually their relatives and ancestors. And so an awareness of those roots, I think, is really present in this campaign, and it makes it really unique. And obviously my hope is that it makes it more effective, that these workers are more likely to win.
Yeah.
Something you didn't mention, but obviously should just be clarified for people, because of the pandemic, instead of an in-person vote, the vote is happening through mail-in ballot. So workers are voting on unionizing right now, and they have until March 29th to finish that process.
Right. Although I have two follow-ups to that because you wrote in your piece about how Amazon used a variety of tactics I want to get into a little later how is this all not illegal? Because it seems very illegal. Including they tried to make them hold some of these votes in person, right? Which is impossible when you're trying to stay safe in the pandemic. Can you talk about some of those efforts?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, they're sort of detailed quickly in the piece, but I mean, throughout the past couple months, the reporting has just been one crazy story after the next. So one thing that Amazon has been doing is through their very anti-union law firm that they hired, they've been petitioning the National Labor Relations Board to delay this election in all sorts of ways. So the first thing they did was argue about the size of the bargaining unit, the number of workers that would be included in the union. And they actually basically won that argument. At first, it was supposed to be only 1,500 workers, and as you see in the piece, it's nearly 6,000 that actually are going to vote. Now, this is good in a sense, in that we have more workers who are actually going to be unionized if they decide to do so. The difficult part is that a lot of these are the seasonal workers, the temp workers that Amazon relies on so much, and they are very hard to organize. Imagine people that only stick around for a few weeks or a few months. That's a lot of work for the organizers to get them on board. But the next thing they did that you mentioned was, once they realized that the NLRB was going to go forward with this election, they started saying that it had to happen in person. Now, there's a pandemic, which is what the board said, and Amazon began appealing over the numbers. They said, sure, our county, Jefferson County, where this facility is, had something like a 17% positivity rate, something very dangerous as far as coronavirus. And Amazon said, yeah, but our warehouse has a lower rate. And of course, the board said, yes, but this would be happening in this county. You're asking people to expose themselves. And ultimately, the board ruled against Amazon on this, though not before the company offered to put all of the NLRB people up in their own hotel and hire a bus just for them to keep them safe. All of which the board, of course, said that kind of looks like you're sponsoring us and we're supposed to be neutral here. So we're not going to take a hotel stay from you. But so that was one thing. Now what they've been doing is the sort of standard anti-union campaign. I talked to a labor historian for that New Republic piece who sort of joked that Amazon is getting sort of screwed by their law firm. It's using really stale tactics, standard propaganda that's always been used. So what they're doing is having workers come to meetings that are held by the management of the facility that sort of warns them against voting for the union, tells them, that they're going to have to pay dues. This is going to make their lives much worse, all but threatening them, basically. You can't threaten the workers for supporting the union, but you can give your own opinion, right? If you're the employer. They also have had, in the bathrooms of the warehouse, when you sit in the stall right at eye level, are anti-union posters that are put up by Amazon. And I think the craziest thing, which I'm not sure I mentioned in the piece because it hadn't been confirmed, is another reporter, Kim Kelly, who had been reporting from Bessemer for the past few weeks. She actually found out that Amazon had gotten local officials to change the traffic lights at the intersection outside of the warehouse. Union organizers had been standing out there and talking to workers in their cars as they waited for the light to change, because union organizers can't actually go on the property of the facility. And so as it turns out, it's now been confirmed that the officials said, yes, they did actually change the traffic light at Amazon's behest. And this actually caused a car accident that almost hit a union organizer. So Amazon is pulling out all the stops on this.
Yeah, I believe that was broken either last night or this morning by The Verge.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. I want to touch on that with you. I'm glad that you brought it up yourself. But just kind of back to the fact that any of this is legal, this kind of intimidation. We saw the beginnings of this effort in here in New York, where we are, in Staten Island, where organizers, more at the beginning of the pandemic, they tried to form a union, and many of the organizers were fired in retaliation for trying to do that. Now, that is illegal, but yet Amazon is able to get away with it because they have so much power, and they're able to make a case that it wasn't necessarily about organizing a union or forming it. It was about other things. Can you talk about to the best of your knowledge, that Staten Island effort and how it spilled over into what's happening in Bessemer, Alabama right now?
Yeah, so the RWDSU was involved in organizing that Staten Island warehouse. They never got to the point where they filed for a union election. And so I can't give you the sort of inside. RWDSU hasn't told me sort of the process by which they went from Staten Island to Bessemer. But it is very clear that Amazon, as you say, was very quick to retaliate. They were far less sort of on process to file for an election than what happened in Bessemer. And already the leaders of that organizing were retaliated against. One thing I would say is that I think for people who don't really pay a ton of attention to this stuff, it can seem really shocking. And the reality is that just because something is illegal, it does not mean employers don't do it. So a big problem with labor law in the United States is it's incredibly weak in the first place. It sort of stacks everything against workers and in favor of employers. But on top of that, what laws there aren't really enforced. So employers, not just powerful ones like Amazon, but actually all sorts of employers, even sort of smaller businesses, frequently retaliate against people for organizing with their coworkers. And, if they ultimately get caught, which requires the workers to file charges against them, to go through the process and to actually win their case, the fine is usually minuscule. So Amazon will get slapped with a few $1,000 fine. And this also happens, when companies like Amazon are found faulty for workplace fatalities. Amazon has been slapped with tiny fines in facilities where a worker died, and it was proven that it was Amazon's own negligence that caused that death. So I think that's a really important thing to understand. But it's true also that that's the context by which, when the workers in Bessemer reached out to this same union, this union, unlike many others, I think already had a sense of what they were up against and an ability to kind of evaluate what this campaign would look like, because they had already been organizing in New York.
Right. But I think the new wrinkle is that law firm that you mentioned, right? I mean, the Bessemer unionization process organizing effort got further down the line, and so Amazon got more spooked hiring this firm Morgan Lewis. I think they're being paid tens of thousands of dollars per day, which kind of steps on Amazon's argument that they're not able to pay their workers when they're able to spend this amount of money on breaking up the union. Can you talk more about the role of this firm and how it's used, I guess, questionable tactics and what its role is? And I guess Morgan Lewis, they're infamous for this kind of work, no?
Yeah. Morgan Lewis is one of the big ones. So there's a handful of these firms that are union busting law firms that everyone involved in the labor movement, when you hear something like Morgan Lewis, you're like, oh God, okay, this is a serious fight. The polite term for them are management side law firms, but they're union busters. And so the tactics that they're using are, what I've mentioned, which is first trying to stall this case as long as possible. And the reason for that, and the stalling again, is first arguing about the size of the union, then arguing about how the vote's going to take place, all those things, having these consultants come in to help management scare workers away, to help put up flyers opposing the union. And a big part of this process of stalling and scaring is that it's pretty well established that in a union campaign, the more time that the employer has from when the workers file for that union election to when the election is held, the better chance management has, because they have all of this time. The more time they have all of a sudden to start scaring workers. Again, like I said earlier, unions have really circumscribed rights in this process. It really seems like a very unfair process, because it is. People, I think, are shocked when they sort of follow one of these campaigns that, why isn't the union allowed on the facility? Whereas the employer is allowed to call workers into meetings on their shift and tell them that the union is bad and that they, all but shouldn't vote for it, or else. But that's just how this process works. And so, it's a big reason a lot of people in the labor movement want changes to the laws on this. But yeah, Morgan Lewis is certainly a key actor here, and they're a well-established player in this process. As far as it's pretty clear what they'll do, and they're doing exactly what's expected of them.
You mentioned in the piece that Amazon has union detection algorithms, or that Bezos has used that kind of tactic in the past. I'm fascinated by this. Obviously, also deeply disturbed. Can you break down what that tool is that Amazon can use to squash unions based on their own algorithm, I guess?
Yeah, so there was really, that's based on, I think it was Vice that broke this sometime in the past year or so. And it was about Whole Foods, which Amazon owns. And they found out through documents, I think in emails that had been sent to them, leaked to them, that Amazon, or Whole Foods in this case, has these algorithms that have all sorts of inputs as far as the data. And they generally are about the propensity of workers at a location to organize a union. So some of the data points there are how many unions are in the area, how many other unions, what is the union rate in the area? What is the demographic breakdown of the workforce? Are these minority workers, right? Are these, because I mean, it's pretty understood that, for example, in the United States, Black workers have been the most loyal to unions for a long time. And so Amazon is sort of making these data points proxies for unionization likelihood. Are there worker centers in the area? What are the politics of the locations existing sort of city or neighborhood? All these things that give them a sense, if they calculate it, should they be on the lookout? Are workers here reporting dissatisfaction at a higher rate than at other locations? That might give them a sense that maybe workers are actually talking to each other about their problems and feeling more comfortable voicing discontent. These things are very scary and dystopian. Obviously, it really sounds like it's out of a sci-fi movie. But this is, Amazon really is the cutting edge of employers that are anti-labor. Other things that have been reported in the past year or so are that Amazon has had the Pinkerton agency on its payroll. The Pinkertons were famous as anti-union mercenaries at the height of, the labor movement 100 years ago, shooting down striking workers. And they still exist. They're a slightly cleaned up, scrubbed version of their old self, but they still do basically the same thing. They help the boss fight the workers. And Amazon, as far as I know, there's no evidence that they have employed them in the United States, but in Europe, they have in fact implanted Pinkerton members of the Pinkerton agency into workplaces to keep an eye on organizing.
It's unreal. It reminds me of when, like, Eric Prince, I forget what he changed the name to, but when he tried to rebrand Blackwater, it's like,
yes,
rethink your whole business model before
right.
a revamping of how you're perceived. Lastly, I just want to emphasize how impressive and inspiring this worker effort is. Just some of the statistics that you laid out in terms of what these workers are up against financially. The median household income in Bessemer is just over $30,000. Bezos is worth $184 billion. Median household income in Bessemer is $30,000. That's not, median salary for people. And 1 in 4 residents live in poverty. And you also mentioned that 80% of the workers there are Black, I believe, not just people of color, but Black. Is that what you said? And I know that over half are women. So just how all of those things coalesce and how that kind of makes this really Herculean effort to lead the charge in terms of Amazon warehouse unionization.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'd say in closing is for exactly the reasons you just mentioned, even if me and you don't work in an Amazon warehouse, even if people listening to this don't work in an Amazon warehouse, a win for these workers, if they go union, is a win for every worker in the United States. And I would say around the world too, but certainly in the United States. For all of these reasons, the odds are incredibly against these workers, and they've gotten this far. And if they can win this vote, it means that any of us can take on our bosses and win. If you can defeat Jeff Bezos in Bessemer, anything is possible. And I think all of us need that sort of jolt in the arm as far as a sense of the possibilities for the future.
Yeah. Absolutely. Alex Press, staff writer at Jacobin, author of The Alabama Town That Could Defeat Jeff Bezos. That's in the New Republic. Thank you so much, Alex, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.